this something you learned? Were you born an entrepreneur?
You got to start small.
I have not allowed being a woman to hold me back.
Credibility is not just making money, it's about making sure that people trust what you're doing.
Law practice is not only about going to court, it's about advice.
It's very difficult to hire somebody who's not motivated and then make them motivated.
One of the things that I'm known for is integrity.
They have to see you as a person of integrity.
Welcome to the Executive Lounge with me, Shira Ado, and as always, this is where we showcase the best minds and tell the stories of men and women who have scaled the daunting heights of either starting their own businesses or managing institutions right here at home and around the world. This is a platform that is not the preserve of only Ghanaians. As you know, we've brought you some great minds from around the world, and this episode is no exception. My guest is the ambassador of the Republic of Kenya to Ghana. Hitherto, in our long history of friendship with Kenya, there has never been a physical embassy here in Ghana, but after many years we now have an embassy and an ambassador in the person of Eliphas Mugendi Barine. Your Excellency, you're welcome to the Executive Lounge.
Thank you very much.
It's a pleasure to finally meet you.
Thank you very much indeed.
Karibu.
Asante sana.
and that's about all the Swahili I can speak.
No. We will be. I think we'll be having some Swahili lessons. We can try and see whether we can put this together, because Swahili is actually an African continent, official language.
That's right.
Within the African Union.
Yes.
But notwithstanding, let me begin by saying how flattered I am listening to you introducing the program. I think I may not fall in that category, but I'm excited. Secondly, let me also thank those that have been have helped us put this together. I think I have been here barely 4 or 5 weeks, and I think it's a privilege for me to appear before the cameras and, of course, to be able to have a conversation. Importantly, of course, is more or less a platform to announce to the great people of Ghana that Kenya has actually opened a mission here in Accra, and business will be conducted here. So we are open for business. Whoever is looking for any assistance, information, we are open 24/7, and we invite each one of you really to engage us, because we are here to work together and be able to grow our relationship to the next levels. And of course, if you allow me, I think, as you might already know, is 2 days ago, we had the misfortune and we lost our second president of the Republic, His Excellency Daniel Arap Moi. The nation is in mourning, not just the nation. We're hoping the entire continent and the world is mourning because of the many years he has put together in the leadership, as well as, of course, promoting the growth of the continent, as well as his service to the humanity. So on that note, of course, we are on low key. We have a program elaborate that defines how that process will be taken over, and it is our hope and prayer that the family will have the fortitude to bear the loss. And that, of course, goes to every Kenyan and everyone who knew him for his good deeds, and the entire humanity.
Well, I would like to also say on behalf of Ghanaians, we extend our condolences to the people of Kenya and to the family of the late President Arap Moi. Growing up, that was a name that I always heard. So quite a lot of people who would have followed current affairs on the continent would certainly have that name ring a bell. So he did touch many people, including those he never met. And we're grateful for his service, and also we mourn with you.
Thank you very much.
It's a collective loss to all of us.
Thank you. Thank you.
So Kenya is known for the great safari in terms of your positioning as a global destination for tourism. How have you managed to make that a mainstay of the Kenyan brand?
Thank you very much for that. I think, first of all, we must thank God for bestowing us with the infrastructure that we call in the name of the animals that we have in the environment, and of course in the flora, the fauna, and the landscape, because all that combines really to put the wildlife together. But importantly also, I think it is the deliberate effort that has been made in order to protect that for posterity. It has been a challenge, and of course, you know, the demand for illicit trading on matters of horns for the rhino, the elephant tusks, the skin and everything else for animals and all that kind of thing. And therefore we have had to invest quite a great deal in order to protect this wildlife. I'm happy that I think the government took the right decisions very early at a point when the numbers were completely diminishing. So we feel that those animals are not really Kenyan, they are for all of us, and we all need to put our hands together in order to protect, because it gives you a lot of joy when you watch, when you visit the parks and you are able to see those animals. And of course, I think that's part of the ecosystem that we all need to protect. It is true that safari really is synonymous with the Kenyan, and I think what has happened is both in terms of protecting the animals, in terms of securing the parks, in terms of providing the infrastructure to visit the parks, and in terms of training. Because I think all that put together will be able to give you a very memorable tour and visit. Secondly, I think beyond the animals, of course, is we've been having the wildlife-human conflict around that, and therefore it is part of educating the society that indeed it is useful, it is important that we all work together and protect that heritage, because it is, if we were to make the mistake and it's lost, it will be a tragedy. And I think even in terms of the value chain it brings, both in terms of employment, because it's a great employer, both in terms of incomes that we generate from the tourism, and that flows all the way, it actually cascades from the lowest to the highest, from the farmer, because the farmer will feed, will supply the supplier to the restaurant, and the restaurant to the hotels, and so on and so forth. So it's a very wide system that that is anchored on the wildlife. And I think I must admit that indeed wildlife has been a great blessing to the people of Kenya in sustaining the tourism sector, so to speak. Yes.
You know, you mentioned, first of all, that at the base of this value chain is the environment that engendered the growth of wildlife, and you identified early on and started the protection, which is a very difficult job. We see the stories, we hear the stories of how you're fighting poaching. But beyond all of that, you mentioned one critical thing, which is training. What levels of training and how has that impacted on the quality that visitors to Kenya feel as part of their overall experience?
Thank you very much. I think tourism as a sector is a very sensitive and delicate industry. The visitors have options, and the options are not limited. So it is to figure out how you're able to sustain and keep them coming. And in all that, I think the human factor is so critical, that that interaction between the visitor and the team that is managing that infrastructure connects. And you'll not be able to do that until that time that you're able to grow the skills to be able to train and to be able to respond to the market needs of the day. And that will require upgrading and review programs. Very early in at our independence, in fact, we were able to set up a very renowned training institution, the Kenya Utalii College. Anyone who has, particularly in sub-Saharan Africa, is in the tourism sector, it is most probable that has benefited from that institution. That institution is still ongoing, and anyone, we will see the footprint of Utalii College everywhere, and I'm very glad that I have met several already here in Accra that are trainees and graduates of the Kenya Utalii College. and is one that is that has been modeled around very high standard institutions, particularly with the support of the Swiss government.
Okay.
And so the curriculum is rich, the training is rigorous, and there is usually the usual refresher courses and everybody. But also there's a question of standardization. So you have a body that will evaluate the hotels, the tour operators, and everybody else. So you have a self-regulating institutions that will ensure that we all keep up to that. That is not to say that we are there. I think there's much more to be done, because the sector is changing very rapidly. And of course, we all need to begin to think to the next level to see how we can improve on those skills.
Absolutely.
But clearly, there is a very sensitive and requires trained and well-trained personnel.
You know, you make a very, very fantastic point when you say the tourist has options, you know, and the world is changing rapidly. So as you have a complexity of new demographics and new tastes, it means that everyone who's managing anything in that value chain has to up their game and constantly, you know, observe where the trend is going and be ready and anticipate those changes. The standardization of training and its attendant benefit to the economy, would you say that would be a critical aspect of achieving service quality, especially in the tourism sector, that has differentiated Kenya from any other country that would boast of wildlife?
I would want to believe so, because unless, of course, you are regularly assessed just to see whether you're keeping up and you're growing on the skills, it is most probably that you'll be contented with what you have been with. But I think you need to have a regulator that will walk around the institutions and have a look at what you're doing, both in terms of the facilities, so that they are also graded, both in terms of the quality of service, both in terms of ratio, both in terms of the skills of personnel, but also in terms of how they interact with the visitors. I think it is important that that process is carried out on a regular basis. And then where you have an unregulated, it is most likely that you lose the grid. So it is important to keep focused, that you have a regulator that will ensure that you know, the standards are maintained. And I think that's the heartbeat of it. And but I'm hoping that we will continue on that trajectory.
Wonderful. Now, the pride of Africa. I can't talk to you and never mention, you know, the pride of Africa being Kenya Airways. Of course, for a nation that expects lots and lots of people, one would think that it makes economic sense to have a carrier that's owned by the nation to get people in and out, and also increase the layers of windfall that would come your way in terms of revenue. But would you advise other countries that are, you know, what would you say would be the markers that should be the determining factors that says, okay, probably it's a good idea for this country of ours to have a national carrier?
You know, seated where I am, it is very difficult to speak about any other country. I will have very serious hesitation to speak about other countries. But broadly speaking, I think it's a business. And the airline industry, looking at it, is becoming complex, sensitive, and very, very difficult to manage. Largely not just because of equipment, but I think because of the costs that come to it, matters to do fuel, competition that is there, depending on whether there are subsidies or there are none. And also, of course, the kind of training that we require on a regular basis, particularly for the inboard and in-flight, the pilots. Kenya Airways has had a long journey. It's a brand that we would want to protect, not just for Kenya, but I think we feel is not a Kenyan airline, is actually an African airline. And we are excited because we meet a lot of people that will tell us Kenya Airways is really not a Kenyan airline, it's actually an African airline. And we would want to roll it and to retain it that way. But importantly also is whether each one of us can actually have an airline. I think where we are moving to, if we must live to our commitment to integrate the continent, I think the airline industry needs to be part of that discussion and ask ourselves, how do we harness and how do we grow the value and the potential around existing airline, either in terms of because a number of these airlines are actually listed in the stock exchange. Right. We can actually be able to either to buy in or engage in a different framework that will allow you to have a stake and a share. That way you'll be able to come up with a bigger, a more viable, competitive fleet of and an airline that will be able to serve the continent better. Right now, I think we are competing with more established, larger airlines, and no wonder I think a number of airlines are having it not very easy. Kenya Airways is not making profit as we speak now, but it's our desire that at some point we'll be able to turn the curve and be able to be on a profit curve at some point. But broadly speaking, I think this is one of the areas that we need to begin to engage with. I know the discussions are already ongoing. We have a bilateral air service agreement between ourselves and yourselves. And I think we can find hubs, because what is important is to build a brand and a curve, a hub, so that you're able to feed in and feed out. And that network is important.
Economies of scale.
Economies of scale. Alone, depending on the levels of our economies, and of course, whereby we're talking about matter subsidies, which are complex. I think increasingly it can be very, very difficult. But again, I think this is a discussion that needs to be seriously taken by the African leadership, just to make sure that we have a business model airline, but also one that is able to accommodate and bring everybody on the board, other than having to start an airline everywhere. And we have seen the history. I don't think lessons that we have seen before are a good guide to encouraging every other country in the continent really to have an airline. It's complex.
I agree. I think there's quite a lot of benefits and leverage than having to start all over again. And of course, with the coming into force of the African Continental Free Trade area, it means that there are potentially even quicker ways to leverage some of these things. And of course, we've had quite a number of member states in the AU already ratifying the Single Air Treaty for Africa, which should bode well for all of us.
Yes.
Yeah. All right. Well, Ambassador Barine, we're going to take a short break, and then when we come back, we'll go into other interesting aspects of the conversation, and we'll explore this long-standing friendship between Ghana and Kenya. Stay tuned. We'll be right back. Welcome back to the Executive Lounge with me, Inshira Ado, and my guest, Ambassador Eliphas Mugendi Barine. He is the Kenyan ambassador to Ghana, and we spent some time talking about tourism, its impact on the Kenyan economy, lessons that Ghana can learn from this development. And I'd like us to turn our attention to agriculture. I mean, there's a impending demographic explosion that at some point we can expect to see up to about 1.3 billion plus people living on the continent. Yep. Kenya has done quite well based on the evidence in the literature I've seen, as far as your agriculture is concerned, not just for farming in terms of food and industrialization, but even in the flour business, that quite a decent amount of your GDP comes out of that sector. How did you get it right?
By default.
Okay.
First, I think I'll say that the horticulture business is a recent phenomenon. Prior to, we had a mainstay of our economy, which was around coffee sector, and thereafter tea. Of course, we had a bit of dairy and stuff. But today, of course, out of the collapse or the challenges around those two main cash crops, I think then the investor had to come in, and the entrepreneurial mind of the Kenyan community had to come up, and then they were to look for alternative. And I think the investment that has gone into the horticulture sector is paying off. Because we now have a fair share of the global horticulture business, particularly the flowers and in particular the roses. So much so that a lot of roses that we find around, and we are looking forward, of course, to 14th is around the corner. So we're looking up to very good business. Yeah. The red roses and any other rose for that matter. is a sector that the private sector has put in a lot of money, and it is paying off. What that has meant is you have to begin to invest, and invest purposefully and heavily in that sector. It's a sector that requires quite a lot of capital to do. But we are happy, we have investors that have come there, and the Kenyans have also joined the league, and we in the market. Of course, again, is the cost of production. And one of the things that I think is working out is the labor matters that talks about the cost of labor. And clearly, I think Kenyans are very hardworking, and they have helped grow this to the level where it is. So is one area that is continue to promise, and I think we have had interaction with a number of Ghanaians that would want to venture into that. Okay. We feel the market is vast, because there is no one who can exhaust the global market on this. And of course, looking at the environment and the skills of the Ghanaian people, and of course the friendship that we spoke about, I think there's scope for us to work together and help each other, hold each other hand, in order to grow wealth and to share the technology that we have acquired over a period of time. Okay.
Yeah. With regards to the willingness to help, I think there's already some quick gains in that regard. Yes. A number of Ghanaians in the agriculture sector have been on a number of programs to Kenya to learn. Where do you see such collaboration going, and especially against the backdrop of the AFCFTA going into force in July this year?
I think I'll begin by saying that this is largely a private sector led program. And the private sector in Kenya is organized around sectors, so that you have the chambers that will look, or even within the chamber, you have institutions that are focusing on particular areas. You have fresh flowers associations and this and the other. And I think what we need to do is seek out for the Ghanaians that are keen, and we should be able to organize either to have a visit, or perhaps also, if it works for them, I think have an invitation, so that we have a meeting between the two, and they will be able to now begin to share and work out. Of course, there are details that you and I may not have, because we are not in the industry, so to speak. But I think clearly the governments have pronounced themselves, and of course the private sector will follow queue. There's no doubt about it. We haven't seen any hesitation. In fact, prior to my coming to Ghana, I had a meeting with the Kenya National Chambers of Commerce and Industry, and their doors are open. They are already in collaboration. I think what we need to do is augment that and be able to push them to the next level and open the doors where they need to get contacts where there are none, and be able really to get to the next level.
Fantastic stuff. Yeah. The agriculture sector, I mean, Africa is blessed with a lot of arable land, even though we still have a very vast Sahara. And so, considering that the West and the rest of the world tend to look to Africa to do trade deals, and with that comes to mind the fact that, I mean, Kenya has been able to structure a trade deal, negotiate a trade deal with the US that no other African country has been able to do. The rest of Africa may have signed up to the AGOA agreement, which in itself is nearing its end. What would you advise as some of the key things that a nation that's looking outside of the continent to do trade would have to be able to do to ensure that not only are they getting the fair share of the deal, but that they're working in the interest of their own people as well?
Thank you very much. I think that I have had a lot of that around whether Kenya has had any free trade agreement with the United States of America. I think what is on the table are proposals. So we do not have one. Of course, as you appreciate, America is a huge market. And as you have mentioned, AGOA is coming to a closure in 2025. We have a strategy around that, on how to manage that. And of course, it speaks to every sub-Saharan African country or any country that accesses the American market under the AGOA framework. I think the issue is prior to that moment, what should be happening. And I think, as you appreciate, is to keep the conversation going. And it is true, every government, of course, you don't wait until the last minute, but importantly is to continue the conversation. As we speak now, what is on the table are just proposals, and the whole idea, of course, is not in any way to offset what is already happening in the continent. I think Ghana and Kenya were among the first, in fact, the first countries to sign the African Free Continental Trade Area, to ratify and deposit. So we are among the first one, and all of us hold very steadfastly that, because we firmly believe the way to go is to consolidate markets within the continent. If you look globally, where countries make money and where countries trade most, you start from within. Begin at the domestic, begin at the regional, and before you even go out of the continent. But what we are saying is it's important, because when we look at our trading partners, a lot of our trade is within the continent. In fact, 40% of our trade is within the COMESA region. So if we can expand that and be able to break down the usual barriers, which talks about the infrastructure, that will talk about the tariff and the non-tariff and related, I think we have enough market to be able to work from and be able to create and build wealth within the continent itself. But let me also underscore again that indeed, whereas there has been that in the media, as at now, there is none. We don't have an FTA.
So these are all proposals?
There are proposals that will go on and off, but as at now, they are proposals. They haven't been discussed through, but I think it takes time before we get there.
Okay.
Yep.
Well, thanks so much for the clarification on that. AFCTA, AFC FTA, so African Continental Free Trade Area, will start commence trading in July, on the 1st of July. And it's quite interesting that you mentioned that Ghana and Kenya were one of the very first countries to have actually signed, ratified, and made the deposits. It underscores what I mentioned earlier of a long-term collaboration as nations, going way back into history. How do you foresee the AFCFTA changing the way we trade amongst ourselves on the continent?
Foremost, I think we need to look at what necessitated the establishment of the Organization of African Unity, which of course mutated into the African Union. The whole idea was really to be able to bring the people of Africa together, to be able to grow wealth together, to be able to work, to be able to locate, to be able to move around the continent. The idea of the African Continental Free Trade Area is really to be able to help African nations and African people trade among themselves, that they are able to locate the market within distance. Now we going out there globally, far-flung countries where competitions are extremely high, the standards are critical, but yet we have an available market which are being supplied from other sources. The whole idea is to be able also to grow the skills within the continent and be able to add value to all these goods and services that we produce, and be able to invest either in the country and share experiences and resources. And what we have witnessed, of course, the African Union already is at it in form of having established the regional economic blocs, which are important in order to begin to engage. And I think under that framework then, the ECOWAS, for example, will be able to engage much more easily with COMESA, and investment from COMESA and into ECOWAS or intra-country trade should be much more easier to deal with that. And once the agreement is fully in place, I think what it speaks to is we should be able to reduce the challenges that we face. First of all is to reduce matters tariff, so that if you have products that are emanate from country A to country B within the continent, then they should be given the preferential without necessary, because it's actually a common trade area. So there should be no barriers either in terms of duties and other related activities, neither delays in terms of non-tariff barriers. And I think those are the challenges that we face. But importantly also, I think for that to happen is we need to begin to grow the quality and of goods that we're also producing, because these markets are there, yes, but these markets are actually being supplied. So we also be getting into an environment that they are already those goods, and we should be able now to begin to compete amongst other global players. Infrastructure is one of the key challenges, because moving goods from country A to B, it becomes a little bit of a challenge, particularly, in fact, if you are to think about moving goods from Kenya to Ghana, you know what it will mean. You either have to go around the continent, sometimes you have to, those goods will have to be consolidated somewhere, either in Asia or Europe or another thing.
And then send back.
To this. And of course, that is additional cost, and therefore makes your products much less competitive or not competitive at all. So we need to work out something around there, particularly on matters of infrastructure. I don't know how we go about it, but there's commitment that we need to continue to grow infrastructure in form of rail and in forms of airline, as you mentioned earlier on, and probably even shipping lines. And I think as a country, we have decided that we need to establish a shipping line that will be able to help us to navigate around those areas. The rail sector is growing, and if you recall, we are doing in the East African region, Kenya has started what we call the standard rail gauge. Tanzania is on it. Both of them will be complementing each other to be able to reduce the cost of movement of goods and services across the region, and probably hoping it will go beyond to the other regions of the world. In fact, if you are to look at developed economies, trade is done by rail, any movement of goods and services. So whether railway, investing in railway is expensive, I think is a question that should come much after. Because
the benefits in
railways
long-term
are not intended to recoup their investment in the next 2, 3, 4, 5 years. In fact, that is why you would even want to justify the existence of government, because government must be able to provide service and make it easier for citizens to do business and to grow wealth. So I think all of us need to support the efforts to lay down railways so that it can be easier for us to trade much easier and better.
And I know the big rail project in East Africa is obviously cutting right across Kenya all the way. Is it to Ethiopia?
In the end, it will end up in Ethiopia.
So imagine all of this actually being able to run right across.
Yes.
And we have rail. So it means the movement, if we can create more speed of moving goods and services across the continent, then we would have increased the cycle of the economy, which means more money for everyone.
Absolutely. Absolutely.
These are beautiful ideas, and we've conceived them in the past. Some watchers will say, well, we've heard this before. How optimistic are you based on what you've seen from the commitment of governments to the kind of work the AU has done in getting this done in a record time? How optimistic are you that this truly would be a game changer?
I'm an optimist, and I think I want to invite all Africans not to accept the invitation to be Afro-pessimists. I think we need to have trust, confidence, and faith in ourselves. And until that time, I think we will continue sitting where we are. And I think it is time that we woke up. And if we are saying that African solution will be found by the African people, and which I strongly and firmly believe in, then all of us must wake up and do something. Foremost, I think when we're talking about the African free continental trade, it was free will of the African people. We went into it, and it has taken time to consolidate. In fact, it started in 2012 and crystallized in 2019. And I'm happy that the seat of this, the Secretariat, will be here in Accra. And we have all listened and followed what the President of this country, His Excellency Ado, is saying, that he is committed to ensure that it takes off within the agreed time frame, which is by July of this year, we should be able to begin the trading process around that. I have no doubt whatsoever that will happen. And I want to believe that the African Union itself, as a secretariat, will commit and deal with this institution a little more differently from any other, to understand that here, time has come to deliver a service. And I expect them to come up with a clear plan of how we can be able to achieve those goals that have been set up, and also to help us to deal on matters of policy, on matters of eliminating the NTBs and all other things. But importantly, and I think this is where we have a challenge, and I was challenging myself, is how do we resolve trade conflicts, or where you don't honor, because there's a lot of this. And clearly, I don't think the judicial process is the way to go. And I would want that to imagine that the African Union is thinking around having to have alternative dispute resolution around trade, because I think that is where we have a bigger challenge. That traders should be able to resolve this outside in a more cost-effective. In fact, if we can minimize cost of resolving trade disputes, to me that will be a great, I think will be a great opportunity for all of us. And I think the private sector, since really all these governments are not doing business, is the private sector that is doing, we have an opportunity to be able to engage. And the private sector has enough skills and knowledge and experience around these subjects. And that will only happen, of course, if also the private sector is organized, so that there is advocacy, and they will be able to put their thoughts together, be able to put down a paper and say, from us as practitioners, as traders, this is how we feel we should be able to resolve matters trade dispute, so that a matter is not in court for 10 years, 5 years, because no business will survive. If we can be able to have time-bound plan on how to resolve this. In fact, I would give an example whereby we have within our constitution how matters talking about dispute around presidential results are dealt with, because you have a clear timeline that must be submitted within 14 days and must be resolved within 28 days.
Yeah.
And that has worked. And I think business people and the industry would want very expeditious way of resolving, other than having to tie each other in courts. And probably that is what the African Union, particularly the secretary that should be here, is to help us achieve that. And of course, it's self-regulating, whereby the private sectors, and I think chambers must be members of this, so that they are accountable to each other and they be able to grow confidence among each other. Why it is important to have, and I think you're asking, is because the chambers need also to be strengthened, so that they become referrals, and they become the first port of call, so that if there is any engagement, then you cross-check with the chamber whether this business is a business that can be able to honor, is a business that is able to carry the deal through, and whether it can be held to account for its deeds and actions. I think that is what will really help us, because the governments have pronounced themselves. They have even signed the treaty, the agreement. They have ratified that. The rest, what is left is now for the business, and these are the people that move the industry. So we need to get the industry to speak to each other and be able to put infrastructure that will be able to work for them, so that we don't go through the usual process of having to spend years in courts and all that kind of thing. Second one is, of course, strengthening the banking industry, so that you have a system that will quickly be able to process, and payments are done very quickly. And I think part of that is strengthening our ICT sector and the banking industry, and we need to get the banking industry into the process, because you need guarantees, assurances that when you send your goods, payment will be made. How do you get that payment made? So you need to bring in the banking sector either within the framework of chambers.
That's right.
So that all of them are speaking, that the paper that is submitted will be honored at the end of the day.
So multi-sectorial, multi-level collaboration.
Very
critical.
Very critical.
Great stuff.
Because
Okay, well, Ambassador Barine, we're going to take our final break, and then when we come back, I'm particularly interested in learning, going through the streets of Nairobi. It's relatively cleaner than most African cities I have seen. You have a ban on plastics, and we'll learn how that fight is going, and if maybe Ghana can learn a thing or two from you.
Thank you.
Stay tuned, we'll be right back with more. Welcome back to the Executive Lounge with me, Shirado, and my guest, His Excellency Eliphas Mugendi Barine, the Kenyan ambassador to Ghana. Just before we went on the break, I'm always intrigued when I see an environment that has been able to fight pollution, especially plastic pollution. Kenya banned use of plastic bags. If you go to anywhere in Nairobi, the last time I was, you go to the shop, everything is either given to you in paper bags, or you can buy reusable bags. We have a plastic problem here in Ghana, but we haven't banned it yet. There's been talk of it. What can we learn from you, how you were able to do this?
First of all, it is not an easy journey to take, because you have investors, you have traders, you have consumers, you have people that have been acclimatized to the use of that. So what you're saying is actually we abandon all of that. And of course, when you went to the supermarket those days, you had to take about 10 or so for free that were available. Today you go there and you have none. You either take yours or you buy a reusable, as you've said. But I'll say the following, that first of all, I think we all have a duty to protect our heritage and environment. When you look at the threat and from the plastic bags, and it's everywhere in terms of the damage to the soils and to the environment, in terms of infrastructure clogging up the systems, and in terms of course of even to the livestock itself. So when you look at all that, really it was very damaging, and we had to take a decision. That time has come when we have to decide whether we want to continue that way or not. This is based on very deep studies about the damage and how much it takes for those non-reusable or non-biodegradable and plastic papers will take for them really to
totally decompose.
To completely decompose. And someone will tell you it can take up to 300 years. So as you say, of course, you still see remnants of those plastic papers that have been there for some time, but there has been a very big fight. Of course, the industry will fight, because if that is your business that you're working on, and we have seen it, and that's one of the downside. Second, of course, is you need collaboration from everybody. And I think the lessons that we need to take here is I think we need to get the population to accept that it is for the collective good that this is happening. It is not punishment, it is not an inconvenience, and I think that is where we need. So perhaps we will need a little more to go out there and bring everybody on board, and so that there is entire ownership. I think that is where we have a little bit of a challenge, because we still see some traders trying to sneak them from countries that have not done that. And it is true that Nairobi is much better, much cleaner today than it was, because plastic paper was flying everywhere else. Today it is hardly that you can find it, and I think that is a good beginning. And true to it is we have seen other countries having an expression that they would really want to look at what has happened and perhaps follow cue. And we want to encourage those countries, including this country, for reasons that if Nairobi is really what we call the environmental capital, being the seat of the United Nations environmental program, then I think we just had to lead the way. And of course, we all know matters that talks about the environment. They are complex, they are deep, and I think if there's a contribution that any one of us can make as a country, even as individuals, I think it is something that is worthwhile. We have since become accustomed to it, and all of us will take our bags from home. And in fact, you find it is much easier, or if you cannot, of course, there's a cost to it. So next time you go to the supermarket, you carry your bag
take yours.
and clearly, as you said, I think all of us are contributing to the betterment of the universe. And of course, all this will find its way into the ocean. And we're talking about the blue economy and the impact of that on marine and marine life, including fishing and so on and so forth. So I think I would want to invite every government to seriously think about this and see how we can all combat and work on this. Of course, it's not the entire plastic bag that has been banned. It is plastic bag that is not reusable, that is not biodegradable, and there's a formula on which kind of and what gauge or paper is produced, because you continue to produce, but it is not one that you find everywhere in the market. So that it is not complete ban on plastic paper, so to speak, but there are categories and certain grades of plastic paper that has been banned.
Okay, well, thank you very much. Definitely lots of lessons to take away from this. I've thoroughly enjoyed talking to you, and I appreciate you taking time to join us.
It's a pleasure.
I will take out, for me, I'm going to share my 5 takeouts from this conversation. Number 1 is that if you want to grow, you'll only be able to achieve that building on top of what you have been giving by the Creator. So Kenya leveraged the ecosystem, the flora, the fauna, the wildlife, and built a big tourism economy out of that. Number 2 is that your desire to grow must be deliberate. So in building a tourism economy, there was the need to have a standardized training program, which led to the Hotel Industry Training Institute, to ensure that at every turn, tourists are leaving happy. If people feel good about the way you treat them, they're more than likely to talk to people about you or come back. Number 3 is the power of collaboration. There's been a great deal of collaboration from the days of the senior Kenyatta, Jomo Kenyatta, and Kwame Nkrumah in the formation of the Organization of the African Union, which now has become the AU. It's not by coincidence that these countries are linked together. We today have the son of a former president as our sitting president, and Kenya also has the son of a former president as their sitting president. The 2 countries signed and ratified the AFCFTA faster than most others. That says a lot about the power of collaboration, that if you want to go farther, you go with other people. And so look for the right people around you who are going the same way, and see how you can synergize and leverage your strengths so you can be a big force to be reckoned with. Number 4 is that every good thing that you desire must be quantified. You have to decide whether, for example, should you start a national airline? Should you do a type of business? All of these things are great ideas, but first of all, you've got to have to be able to quantify the risk and the benefits that you will get out of it, and be able to then plan on the steps you'll take to achieve that. Finally, one thing I'm taking away from this is that we're one people. Africa is a nation on its own, in spite of the 54 Hamlets that we have within it. So if I could use that as an expression. but we are, first of all, one people. And we must continue to harness the power of that oneness. Thank you, Ambassador Barine.
Thank you very much.
And condolences once again.
Thank you.
From all of us.
Thank you.
To the Kenyan people.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Cool.
Thank you.
It's been wonderful coming your way with the Executive Lounge. Thanks to our friends at Villa Monticello and the crew. We will be back with more. And for you, we're grateful you joined us. Go forward, make rain, shower.